my name is Jason Schluting. I'm an assistant professor of classics in the Department of Languages and Cultures. And just wanted to welcome you guys and thank you for coming. Welcome to you on behalf of the McCarthy Center, on behalf of the Classics program in the Department of Languages and Cultures, and also welcome on behalf of Sarah Evans and Michael Mackin and Hunter Huntoon, who are advanced Latin students that have been working a great deal on the talk that we put together to share with you today. So thank you for coming to Cicero, or Cruz as Cicero, Immigration, Executive Authority, and the Classics. So let's go around and, as you say, let's do some introductions.
I'll start. My name is Hunter Huntoon. I'm a first year here, taking the Jason's class, obviously. Presently I'm a nursing major.
I'm Michael Mackin, and I'm a junior classics major.
I'm Sarah Evans. I'm a senior environmental studies major with a Latin minor.
I'm Scott Richardson. I'm a classics professor.
John Twanda, political science major, pre-law, and I was interested primarily for the talk about the immigration and the executive order aspect. As I'm actually taking an ethics class on immigration.
Oh, great.
Hi, I'm Glenda Ferguson. I work in communication and marketing, and I'm so thrilled with this topic and delighted to see the classic people come out of the corner.
No one puts baby in the corner. Is that a reference to some people here will get?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I'm Gretchen Hughes, and I work for Intercultural and International Student Services, and just kind of on the basis of my work and interest, I was excited to see kind of a different lens for immigration and interested to see the discussion.
I'm a senior political science major, and I'm excited to hear just kind of the background of the classics, because I study the politics pretty much every single day of my life, but the classics I'm not so in touch with, so it'll be interesting. I'm looking forward to it.
I'm Maureen McCarter. I teach gender studies and French, and I don't know, I didn't think I had to justify my attendance. Even though I didn't sign up ahead of time. So.
She's here because I went door to door. Literally.
Back row. I'm Kyle Munchauer. I'm a first year. I'm undeclared. I'm in Scott's 111 Latin class. Interested in the immigration reform piece of this and the classics piece of this as well.
Ken Jones, I teach in history, among other things. Like Ben, I'm really interested to see how you guys pull this together. So it's a cool idea.
Father Elijah Owens, I'm a monk of Subiaco Abbey in Arkansas, and right next door to Texas and Ted Cruz. And in fact, we've had him come talk at our academy. Watched we have a 200 all boys 7th through 12th grade from now 16 nations, and watched him go toe to toe with them. It was quite interesting.
If I knew we had a connection, we would have brought.
We could have done a Skype with him.
Here, the gentleman from Texas.
We could have done a Skype with him, but y'all might have eaten him up. Yeah. He'd do it on Seuss.
My name is Erin Kelsel. I'm a student coordinator here, political science major, and I've helped put together a few panels on immigration in the past with the McCarthy Center, so it's a topic I'm interested in, for sure.
I'm John Houston. I'm in the philosophy department. I received an invitation that indicated I was a VIP.
No insult to those of you who were not VIP.
He had me at that point. I have my royal presence here. So.
Perfect. Okay. So really today, this particular event comes with 4 developments. Okay. The first development would be President Barack Obama's announcement a few weeks ago now that he was planning to take executive action in relation to deferring deportation for certain groups of undocumented immigrants within the United States. The second event, it was Texas Senator Ted Cruz's decision to respond to this by delivering on the floor of the Senate on November 20th, a rendition of what is basically one of the most famous Latin speeches that we have from antiquity. This in particular was a speech delivered by Cicero on November 8th in 63 BCE, over 2,000 years ago. Okay. The third event is the fact that there happens to be 3 classic students whom we just introduced a moment ago, who in their Latin study this semester have become experts on this speech and experts on the circumstances surrounding it. So it seemed like an opportunity that we needed to take advantage of. And finally, the final event is our belief that the classical background of this speech really does have important implications for how we understand it and for its significance. More fundamentally, that this is a belief and a conviction that the study of Greek and Roman antiquity really does have an important role to play in a modern world and an important role to play in liberal arts education here at the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University. So these 4 things coming together, and along with the hard work of the McCarthy Center and many others, and for you guys taking time out, that's what makes all this possible. So thank you. So our plan for today is several-fold. We want to start by showing the speech by Cruz, which makes sense, so everyone can actually have a visual of it. Then Sarah, and then let's see, Michael and Hunter will discuss the background. They're going to offer a translation that they collaborated on, so their own English translation of the speech itself, so you can see it before it was edited. And then we want to consider, they're also going to consider as well what Senator Cruz's goals were before they open the discussion up with some questions that we should talk about and consider together. So without further ado, why don't I turn this over to the gentleman from Texas, Senator Ted Cruz.
The words of Cicero, powerfully relevant, 2,077 years later. When, President Obama, do you mean to cease abusing our patience? How long is that madness of yours still to mock us? When is there to be an end to that unbridled audacity of yours, swaggering about as it does now? Do not the nightly guards placed on the border, do not the watches posted throughout the city, does not the alarm of the people and the union of all good men and women, does not the precaution taken of assembling the Senate in this most defensible place, do not the looks and countenances of this venerable body here present have any effect upon you? Do you not feel that your plans are detected? Do you not see that your conspiracy is already arrested and rendered powerless by the knowledge that everyone here possesses of it? What is there that you did last night? What the night before? Where is it that you were? Who was there that you summoned to meet you? What designs was there which was adopted by you, with which you think that any one of us is unacquainted? Shame on the age and its lost principles. The Senate is aware of these things. The Senate sees them. And yet this man dictates by his pen and his phone. Dictates. He won't even come into the Senate. He will not take part in the public deliberations. He ignores every individual among us. And we, gallant men and women, think that we are doing our duty to the Republic if we keep out of the way of his frenzied attacks. You ought, President Obama, long ago have been led to defeat by your own disdain for the people. That destruction which you have been long plotting ought to have already fallen. What shall we, who are the Senate, tolerate President Obama openly desirous to destroy the Constitution in this republic? For I pass over older instances, such as how the IRS plotted to silence American citizens. There was once such virtue in this republic that brave men and women would repress mischievous citizens with severer chastisement than the most bitter enemy. For we have a resolution of the Senate, a formidable and authoritative decree against you, Mr. President. The wisdom of the Republic is is not at fault, nor the dignity of this senatorial body. We alone, I say it openly, we the Senate, are waiting in our duty to stop this lawless administration and its unconstitutional amnesty. I yield the floor. See ya.
Okay, I'm Sarah. I'm just going to give a little background, little context. So, as Cruz said in the beginning of his speech, Cicero gave this speech over 2,000 years ago in 63 BC against a man named Catiline. And before we go any further in conversation, I think it's important to understand a little more of the context the speech was given under and then individuals involved. So, I'm going to start with Cicero. I apologize, I'm a little nasally. Well, Cicero is a wealthy individual who was the first of his family to reach the position of the supreme magistrate of the Roman government, and that was referred to as the council. And the council is the head of the Senate, which was the policy-making body of the Roman Republic. Catiline, however, unlike Cicero, came from an aristocratic family who had lost their fortune over time. He was elected as praetor in 68 BC, which was another extremely important position in the Roman government. After this, he left for a governing position in a province in Africa, and the next highest governing role that he could reach was the counselor position of the Republic, which Cicero was holding at the time of this speech. Catiline ran twice for the position of consul, and he was also defeated twice. He was defeated in his first time running in 64 BC by Cicero himself, and secondly in 63 BC when he was running. Both of these men were significant individuals in the Roman Republic, but it is clear after hearing Cruz's speech that they may not have similar points of views. One part of Catiline's election promises was, while he was running, was the cancellation of debt in the Republic. It was clear after being defeated by Cicero, the consulship was no longer an option for him, so by means of reaching his promises, he decided to start a conspiracy in hope of achieving the same goal. During this time, there was a social and economic crisis in Rome. Civil war and war abroad left many men without homes or money as a result of their lengthy service to the Roman state. So this left a lot of people in debt and desperate and easily persuaded by Catiline's revolution that he wanted in the Republic. The men who followed him consisted of aristocrats in similar financial positions as Catiline, farmers and laborers who were financially impacted by war, and poor criminals of the state. This leads us to Cicero's first oration against Catiline. So this speech Senator Cruz used was only a small portion of the beginning of Cicero's original piece. Cicero gave his speech in front of the Roman Senate, and to his surprise, Catiline was present for it. Catiline was accused of many acts, none of which relate to an overreach of executive authority like President Obama was. This is going to be a long list of accusations against Catiline. He was accused of plotting the destruction of the Republic, for planning the devastation of the Temple of the Gods, all the houses in the city, the lives of Roman citizens, and overall the entirety of Rome. He was accused of being the commander of troops outside of Rome with Manlius, who was a leading rebellion of the state. Cicero mentions that all crimes in Rome were caused by Catiline due to his influence on citizens of the Republic. Among many other insults, Catiline was accused of killing his wife to make room for a new bride in his home. And another accusation was of planning the massacre of government officials as well as the assassination of Cicero himself. And Cicero claimed that the reason that Catiline had not yet left Rome was because Cicero was still alive. And then Catiline was plotting this all in secrecy, and Cicero claimed that he knew about it, and the speech was to inform the senators that he knew about it, and Catiline that he knew about it as well. So overall, Cicero's hopes in giving this speech were to have Catiline leave the city of Rome. He wanted him to leave and go forth to join armies with Manlius, and this would make him look guilty. And then Catiline did do this. He did leave Rome and went to join troops with Manlius, and this led to a war in northern Italy where Catiline and his troops were defeated, and his followers remaining in Rome were found guilty and executed without trial. By giving the speech, Cicero made Catiline an enemy of the state, and he was exiled and then killed. That's the background.
Well, I'm Michael McIntyre, I'm a classics major. Now that we've seen Ted Cruz's version of the speech, and we've gotten Sarah's wonderful historical background, we can now go into the original translation. This is a translation I put together using help from Hunter and Sarah's translations, along with a written one, and the Latin, of course. I guess to point out what you should listen for are key differences the key differences you should be looking for between the original speech and Ted Cruz's are where Cicero talks about murder and execution. I also have two caveats. One, I'm not an orator. I'm not going to pretend to make a serious speech. And two, I have not memorized the speech, but neither did Ted Cruz. I think it's fair. Here we go. For how long, Catiline, will you abuse our patience? And for how long will that madness of yours still mock us? To what end will your unrestrained audacity throw itself about? Do not the nightly guards placed on the Palatine Hill, nor the night watches throughout the city, nor the fear of the people, nor the assembly of all noble men, nor the special precaution of holding the Senate in such a fortified place, nor the mouths and faces of these men, have not any of these things bothered you at all? Do you not perceive that your plans lie in the open? Do you not see that since your conspiracy has been suppressed, everyone here knows of it? Do you seriously believe that even one of us is unaware of what you did last night, the night before, where you were, whom you summoned, and what kind of plan you took? Oh, the times. Oh, the principles. The Senate knows about these things. The consul sees them. And yet this man lives. He lives? Rather, he comes into the Senate. He acts like a participant of public discourse. With his eyes, he marks and designates each and every one of us for slaughter. We, however, we brave men, seem to do enough for the Republic if we can just dodge that fury and those daggers of yours. You should have been brought to execution a long time ago, Catiline, under the command of a consul, and the very destruction that you've been planning to bear upon all of us should be brought upon you. Can it be that a most magnificent man, Publius Scipio, the high priest and a private citizen, killed Tiberius Gracchus for merely causing a slight disturbance against the state? And will we as consuls put up with Catiline, who wishes to wrought destruction upon the entire world with slaughter and fire? For I pass over those old precedents. The fact that Gaius Servilius Ahala killed Spurius Maelius with his own hand when Maelius was planning a violent overthrow of the Republic. There was at one time in this Republic such honor that brave men would suppress a dangerous citizen with more severe punishments than the most bitter enemy. We have a decree of the Senate against you, Catiline, forceful and serious. Neither does the wisdom nor the authority of this order fail the Republic. But we, I say it openly, we are failing as consuls.
Moving to the Latin.
Latin's up there for reference. Use that for our conversation.
I think I mentioned earlier, I'm Hunter on Tune. I'll be talking about some of the implications of Cruz using this particular speech. And it's important that we consider why he would use this particular speech when, as we've learned from these two, it's quite clearly under very different circumstances. And while Cruz may not have been speaking to a revolutionary criminal, it is clear, at least to Cruz himself, that he is dealing with someone who in his own mind is trying to grab power that does not rightfully belong to him, much like Catalan was. To Cruz, the executive action that Obama is setting out to take is neither legal nor is it allowed under the Constitution. A point he makes very clear when he claims Obama to be openly desirous to destroy the Constitution. In this sense, Cruz sees himself as trying to limit Obama from grabbing absolute power as an imperial figure, much like Cicero attempted to prevent Catalan's grab for supreme power. Another reason why Cruz may have chosen this specific speech is that he sort of betrays his point when he uses the phrase unconstitutional amnesty. Cruz, as we know from watching the news and from this speech, is resistant to granting any sort of rights or citizenship to his what he perceives to be illegal immigrants in this country, while Obama sees himself as granting deserved rights to the disenfranchised, much as Catalan, in his own mind, was attempting to grant not as much citizenship but land and some money to the the landless in his time. Cruz sees himself to be a modern-day Cicero, very much. I mean, we must credit him with his orator skills. He's a very good speaker. He's protecting the state from turmoil and change, or what he perceives will be a turmoil and change if this goes through. This explains this particular speech was chosen, as Catalan managed to gain political support for himself by gathering the dregs of society around himself, including murderers, thieves, arsonists, as well as the poor, landless, and debtors. In using this particular speech, which is actually much longer than what we highlighted, we just used the part that Cruz used, Cruz draws a parallel between Obama and Catalan, insinuating that both of them are trying to use less than reputable citizens or individuals to further their own political power. Some potential implications of his using this speech that we must consider are, regardless of what your political views are, the original speech was quite violent, as we heard. And we have to ask ourselves how appropriate is using such a speech like that against the President of the United States. To Cruz's credit, he does clean it up. He doesn't have the dragging away to murder or the fire and brimstone. But it was a speech which he must have read before he posted that did, in its original form, call for the death of a leading public figure at the power of the person speaking. And we have to ask ourselves if that's appropriate. Another issue is how this reflects on the feelings that Cruz himself may have for illegal immigrants in this country. Again, while the portion of the speech that we highlighted does not yet deal with Catalan's supporters, a later portion has an invocation for what Cicero calls the rabble that supports Catalan to be washed away like sewage and likens them to a plague. If Obama truly is a modern-day Catalan, then Cruz, in essence, must be saying that these illegal immigrants who would be granting the deferred deportation are in the same vein as these individuals and need to be removed, just like sewage and a plague. And such attitudes were perfectly acceptable in the 60s BC, but are they exactly the things that we should be saying on national television in today's world? Finally, Cruz has an Ivy League background in the classics, and a special understanding of his wisdom of Cicero, as he calls it. Something that most of his audience watching this on television or on YouTube does not. And while we're very glad to see the classics brought up anywhere, especially in the government, it begs the question of whether or not it was fair for Cruz to use a speech that most people would not understand the implications of. So as we transition from our background about this topic into a discussion of it, a couple questions to consider would be, how appropriate was it for Cruz to use a speech so full of violent invective against the President of the United States? What does this speak to as for how we treat illegal immigrants in this country? And should Cruz have used a classical speech, or how could he have done it better?
We actually have from the Washington Post a text copy of Cruz's speech with the edits that he himself made to it. So you guys want my copy of this? If you want to take one and just pass it, that would be great. Since we have a spot available, I'll slide it.
Yes.
So in the handout that's going around, you guys will see. And incidentally, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with this wasn't my observation, but the person who had published this online with the Washington Post noted that it seems like this translation actually came from the Perseus Project, which is run through Tufts University. So it's a translation project. It looks like they actually pulled it right off of the Perseus Project and made edits from it. It's word for word minus the subtractions, which you can see with a line crossed through it, and then the items that are in bold are the parts that he had added to it. So I think your translation was better than the Perseus Project. So. Nice work.
It's almost 100 years old.
Yeah. So initial thoughts that maybe people had about this. I mean, what was the first question you had raised is
the use of such a violent speech in its initial form.
Sure, but I want to address that issue. So it looks like Cruz is using a kind of rhetorical device here, right? When you go in and you take a classic thinker like this, people do this with, especially the scriptures a lot, right? You see people quoting especially sort of more powerful, striking words of Jesus. But at the same time, when I hear them doing it, I don't think themselves to be wanting a kind of one-to-one correspondence with themselves and Jesus, or thinking, now understand me as the guy who's giving the Sermon on the Mount, right? The part of your analysis that I want to hear you defend a bit is the attribution to Cruz of this attitude towards immigrants that they are like sewage, etc. Because I don't see any evidence for that in anything he claimed. He doesn't have any of that present in his speech. So I think that would be a limitation that he would acknowledge to the rhetorical device. It seems like he emptied the speech of its violence in that respect. I'm looking at you, but I'm just sort of inviting all of you to this is only because this was your part. But perhaps you've all thought about this a bit. But maybe you've seen something or been missing something with the history of Cruz that would indicate that he has some of this unhappy view towards immigrants. But I think that's a very powerful attribution to a political figure. If we go, right, well, Cicero had all these things. You're using some of the words of Cicero, and then we bring back in the, by the way, here would be another analog if we extended the analogy, but I don't see any reason to think Cruz would want to do that.
Right, and I'm guessing probably my mistake there was how I phrased that. Obviously I don't believe he actually would choose to do that, or that's what he was thinking. I think my point was more that the speech in itself was delivered against Cataline, but Cataline's main point was actually quite similar to President Obama's in his executive actions. He was trying to grant rights to people that both the speakers in both of these different times were against. And I was just trying to say that if you follow the speech, the point that Cicero was trying to make, which he called his speech the wisdom of Cicero. Cicero's wisdom was that you could not trust these people to have any power. And so perhaps I read too much into the title, but if you're going to call it the wisdom of Cicero, Cicero's wisdom was very negative towards these people. And so if you're going to use this particular speech, I figured, it probably wasn't the nicest thing.
I mean, it certainly seems to be the kind of thing that if you know the speech, it invites you to wonder about that next step. And I think that's a fair wondering. Yeah. Okay.
I thought it was a fair extension just because of Cruz's past comments on the subject. He's come out vehemently opposed to immigration, obviously, as you see right there. He's calling it amnesty when it's actually deferred deportation. But in the past, he's also sought to ban any sort of money to going to any sort of undocumented immigrant. They want immediate deportation, wants to ban them from being able to become citizens, what he represents is essentially the far right, and what he wants to do here is he wants to throw meat to the conservative base, which is what he's been doing since the last 2 years, trying to set up some sort of run in 2016. So while I didn't see it in this speech in particular, I think it's fair to say that just based off of what he said in the past. It's kind of an extension of what he views as a severe problem in our society, which is the undocumented workers within the borders. So I thought it was fair on that basis, but I guess I concur that it didn't really come out too strongly in the speech against the immigrants themselves. So. But.
You get to kind of look at, I mean, there's obviously probably thousands upon thousands of interpretations of the speech. So you kind of have to, I think, look at the speech almost at face value. Just kind of, and especially if you know the political environment, not just in Cicero's time, but even today, all the political environment strong in the speech, for 6 years now, the Republicans have been, not for their agenda, but just vehemently opposed to President Obama's. And so, I think you kind of have to look at it to just kind of depends on the way you interpret it. And so some of the language that is used, where it says kill or, whatever, that might not be, let's go out and kill someone. Cicero may have meant let's actually go deeply in that and rush towards and go kill these tyrants. And it's more or less killing the ideas behind these actions.
In terms of the violence, I guess I don't really have too much of a problem with him using the speech. I'm concerned about Cruz's extremity, but I think his major point obviously was just trying to take down what he views as a tyrannical leader, and he didn't necessarily, the violence wasn't really his point. His point was that the president is becoming tyrannical. But
I was just gonna say, there is language of violence in here, though. I think you guys did a nice job, or folks are doing a nice job discussing the immigrant issue with regard to his relationship to, how he's presenting Obama here. I mean, it does talk about Obama's frenzied attacks. It does talk about that destruction which he's been plotting. This is very aggressive language, at least as it's applied to what Obama's trying to do.
And can we clarify one thing for me, Sarah? When you were talking, does Cataline have any governmental position at this point, or is he simply
at this point,
or is he an outsider?
At this moment, he did not at this particular.
Well, then that means, so Jason's point, I think that one of the really interesting rhetorical devices here is that you're taking a speech that's aimed at a usurper, aimed at a revolutionary.
A public enemy, someone who's been declared a public enemy.
And you're directing that at the person with established power in the country, the president. So to me, that's a marvelous rhetorical device that he's twisted it that way.
Marvelous I guess one question would be marvelous in what sense?
In his skill at doing this.
In terms of how striking it is.
Well,
and
think about how embarrassing the green eggs and ham piece was. But if you go to Ben's point about trying to build for 2016, this speech is much more impressive. It shows off some erudition and it twists things in a lovely way for his purpose.
I think it's very effective along those lines.
The irony of that is, along those lines, remember with Mitt Romney, the famous recording in the hotel that came out. The irony is, for those that know classics now not in a box somewhere, but actually brought out to be seen.
We don't allow that.
Yeah, not here. I asked this question then, who got the vote for Cicero? Who did he support? And, was it only the landowners? Was it only a limited few? Was it the peasants? Was it only did the citizens have a vote, the men and the women? So the irony of it is that if one actually played into a Uther classics of what that is, it would say a lot, not unlike what happened to Mitt Romney with the recording. So I asked that question, who did Cicero support and who did Cataline support?
We really took it as Cicero was supporting the status quo and Cataline was proposing a new option against the status quo.
What's the status quo?
The status quo was just the way the Republic was working at this time. I might be interpreting this fully, but just that it was wealthy individuals who were lending money to people who were in debt because of war, and so it was the wealthy individuals who remained wealthy, and Cataline wanted to make the people who were in debt give them back their rights and give them back land and cancel those debts so that the wealthy individuals weren't as in charge as they once were. If anybody has another interpretation.
The way Cicero presents it too is that he's also looking to defend the structure of the Roman state, you know, the authority of the Roman Senate. And the way he's presented Cataline in all of this is that Cataline is looking to lead a revolution to overthrow the Roman government. So there's also this idea along those lines. Your question, you were wondering who are they drawing support
One
to?
could move further to say that if Cruz wanted to equate himself with Cicero, then he's equating himself with an individual who, in De Republica and Cicero claimed the peasants were insane.
It depended also on who Cicero was talking to.
Right,
and
and
we actually have two different.
Scipio as well. Right? But I'm thinking that what's ironic about it is that if one knew the classics further, then you could claim that Cruz is wanting only the 2% to continue to lead. Cruz is not wanting Cataline with the peasants, the little people.
Yeah.
Use Leon Helmsley, a dated reference, but
to just think of Cruz or the speeches of Cicero. This particular speech, Cicero in some ways gave two versions of it. The one we're seeing is the one delivered to the Senate. After he delivered this one in the Senate, Cataline ultimately fled. Okay, and then he delivered another speech to the Roman people generally, letting them know what was talked about and what Cataline had done. So he was notifying the people. That speech actually is cast in a slightly different way. Cataline's still an enemy, but there are a number of, in some ways, slurs you could say in this speech that was given to the Senate that was unfavorable to the people and then the rabble. When he then gave this same speech to the people, he edited those references out in some ways. So even rhetorically, Cicero himself was sensitive to this. Now, does this mean that Cicero, was a defender, in fact, of the common people, generally speaking? I think that is another question. Largely, I don't think that's a group that Cicero would have been as, in terms of actually getting elected to office, the Roman voting system was weighted. Those people who had the most money and those people who were the oldest, their votes counted more. They effectively had more electoral votes. So if there was consensus among that group that they wanted you elected, effectively the rest of people didn't matter because you didn't even make it to their votes because the majority was reached and the election was over. So
I think interesting to go off of that point though is that this was a speech that was delivered to the Senate. Cruz also delivered this speech to the Senate, and with our media, he had to have known that it was going to get out. However, I don't know as though, and I don't know his intention, but I don't know as though he was necessarily intending for this to be a national story. I didn't see him using a teleprompter. I saw him using notes. And I mean, he didn't look bad, but he definitely wasn't, all makeup and everything put on and ready. So to me, it seems as though he's using it in a very similar sense. He's using it meant for his fellow senators to hear, not so much the people. If he was using the people, if he wanted to, address us, I feel like, he might have memorized it perhaps, then a little bit more ready to go.
Can I touch on that really quickly? I was actually interning in the Senate last summer, and a lot of these speeches are delivered to empty floors, which is kind of interesting. So after C-SPAN was created in the 80s, what you saw was kind of a shift from speeches actually given to fellow senators, fellow representatives, to a speech to the public record essentially, and to the people, like kind of so he can, on the campaign trail he said, hey, on the floor I said A, B, C, D. Nobody's on the floor, but he said it, and it's marked, so you can go back and check on it. So that, I think that it actually was meant for the people. It was meant to be a broader audience than the Senate, but I wouldn't have known that unless I was there.
I mean, I guess from what I heard in the speech, primarily was primarily meant for the Senate floor and to rally GOP senators. However, though, if it got out, for him, might be an advantage based on, as a senator politicians not hunting themselves, but, especially Cruz, a well-known politician, is going to be thinking about his party. And especially in politics, every election it seems like a day away. And so he's probably, during the speech, he's probably thinking about the next election. And also and even the past election too. This election, it was no surprise that Republicans took control took a lot of seats, and so he's probably building off that and looking towards the future when he gives his speech. It's kind of like a rallying cry.
He certainly played to his base.
Yeah.
And being from Arkansas and Texas and stuff.
Yeah.
But he also not just played to them with a sense of, you have some credence in your beliefs.
Legitimacy, yeah.
And even Cicero himself, the great orator, would come into this. And I think that it's certainly like, I think, the senatorial campaign going in Louisiana now, where whether you agree with the Democrat or the Republican in that situation, where the Republican refuses to call President Obama president. He's always Obama. And the sitting senator is saying, no, that's a rhetorical device, and you need to stop, and what you're doing is you're implying something. It goes back, I think we were talking about inviting and inferring from destruction and stuff. It's like it's certainly inviting some thoughts.
Well, yes.
In that context.
And I think one could say, I think rhetorically it's brilliant, and it was well done. I do think it, one could say it fits into a portrayal of the president that extends well before this particular event, in terms of some images that are circulated of him. When you're talking about his name, Barack Hussein Obama attempts to sort of present, and when you think about where was he born, this being an issue early on, is he a citizen of the United States, is he not? I do think it continues that conversation forward a little bit too. What is the relationship between this person and our state? And in some sense, it calls into question that person's commitment to it. Other thoughts that people, or questions that people had?
I wondered if there are any other famous individuals who have used classical speeches in a similar vein, and what their implications were.
We did a midterm paper, and I did one that was called, I'm blanking on what it's called, but it was...
it's the substance that counts.
It's the substance that counts. I can't speak much as to recent speeches given, as recent, I would say, being like the past 50 to 100 years. I can tell you, past that time period, there was actually almost a renaissance in using Cicero, and there's another one of the two. There's Cicero and another man named Sallust who wrote about the Catalan conspiracies, and both of them, they had a lot of people actually reference them, used parts of their speeches between the 1600s and the 1800s, both in England and America. And during that time, what they were primarily concerned about, there was a lot more economic issues. There's an event called the South Sea Bubble, so very similar to actually the Tulip Bubble in Holland, if you've heard of that. They went from taking public debt and they transferred it to a company called the South Sea Company, and the shares in that company went from £5, I believe it was, to 1,000 in the course of a month, and it crashed, and of course bad things happened. But the issue there was that they being Tories, I believe at the time, used many of the words from this particular speech and many of the words that we actually heard here, and they talked about how the people in charge of the government at the time were much like a Catalan. They were trying to steal authority, and there were others who would call themselves being a Cicero, and they were trying to defend the public from taking money and transferring it to other places. So, long answer, short question. Recently, I can't tell you, but this particular speech was used very frequently.
why do you guys study this? Why is this speech? I mean, you clearly have put a lot of effort into this speech. You started that before Cruz, as I understand it. So why is this an important speech? I mean, do you have other options? Why
Those dastardly classics professors limit you.
So this is maybe a two-part question. Why did I limit them with this speech? We're all about limitation. No, this is several reasons. This is routinely considered to be one of the best rhetorical productions in Latin oratory. So it's significant for that reason. Cicero was a formidable intellectual and writer. And his Latin was, it actually defines a whole category and style of Latin writing. So students need to read Cicero. It's an important part of it. And this particular speech, in that regard, is important. Historically, it's very interesting as well because you have a first-hand source. His speech was published, he delivered 4 of these speeches, and he published them thereafter. So you have that. It's also significant that we have another source, which you mentioned, named Sallust, who they also read this semester, who produced what was really the first historical monograph among Romans. As a historian, you can appreciate this. Historians love their monographs, you know. Sallust was one of these. For the Romans, he was the first one to produce it. You know, so and he was also a contemporary of these events. So it's very useful as well because you get 2 different sides to the particular story. And it also, caught up in all of this, it gives you an opportunity, we haven't talked in some ways quite as much about this, but it does help you see what was happening at the end of the Roman Republic and why it fell to begin with.
Jason,
the violence.
That's what part of my question is this is part of an ongoing process, if my memory is right, over centuries, where you're basically, the empire is coming, sort of, if you will, the republic is collapsing. So why this moment in here? I mean, it seems to me one question that historians always need to be thinking about is why does something happen at this moment rather than that moment? And you chose this particular moment in here. Maybe it's the nature of the artifacts, maybe it's the quality of the writing, I don't, you know.
Well, I think the other reasons that I had described in terms of the quality of the writing itself, and in a language course, these are authors that these students should have a command of. But in addition, it also offers us an opportunity to discuss these kinds of issues, because you're right, this is part of a pattern. You know, this was a pattern of civil war at the end of the Republic. You had, you know, before this, a civil war between Sulla and Marius. Then you had this take place. After this, you would have the civil war between Caesar and Pompey. After that, you would have the civil war between Antony and Octavian. And Octavian would be the one who would, for various reasons that I don't know that we can get into in our moments here, to sort of bring that particular cycle of civil war to an end and establish, you know, a new political structure to the Roman state, though it wasn't evident immediately necessarily.
But one is like, think of it as this is an iconic speech. It's not just something that happened to be at this particular time and he happened to be consul, but this speech is one that a well-educated senator now in 2014 can present. Expect educated people to know something about, at least know who the author is. And so I think it's besides its inherent value as a piece of rhetoric, and it is one of the best. And in fact, when I learned Latin in high school, the very first thing I read after I was done with the grammar was Catiline 1, this very speech. 17 years old, and there I was reading this, and wow, you can say that to somebody in the Senate. And so it's a classic example of an anti-rebel speech, just castigating somebody you think is usurping authority, and just the fact that Cruz is using this speech as a model for his castigation of the president demonstrates its value as kind of one of those hallmark speeches. And so there are just a handful of watershed works of literature, in this case oratory, that just sort of speak to anything. And so when Hunter was talking about these people in the 17th through 19th century using this as a model for any denunciation, well, it's because this is the best of the
And what they
Cicero,
read when they were 15, 16, and 17.
which, yeah, they read before they were even in the middle.
Well, I was just gonna say, to add to Scott's point here, I'm a year out of high school. My high school teacher, we did, when we finally got into not the basic grammar stuff, some of the higher level Latin, we did the Aeneid and Caesar's Goligors, and I was one day complaining to my teacher about all these similes and the metaphorical parts, and I didn't like the figurative language. And she told me, just wait till you get to the speeches, and I can't say for certain which one she liked best, but I do know that she did mention Cicero first, back when I was in high school, as one of the things that I would probably like better, and one of the things that I would be reading. So it's kind of across the board. I know he is one of the names that you're going to hear when you hear about classical Latin speeches.
And I guess I wasn't arguing that we heard about his name. I was trying to get at why. And I think Jason really gave me an answer to that. So
There's one other detail, we have just a couple minutes left, that people might find interesting, okay? I love it when you see modern appropriations of classics used. That doesn't mean I always agree with the way every single one of them is used. With this particular event, I think what, he chose to work on this speech, or use this speech to sort of speak to this particular issue. This got me thinking, well, what would be, if folks have problems with this, what would have been a more, appropriate use of antiquity to kind of speak to this modern issue? This is a debate that's dealing with immigration. And it caused me to think about, well, what did the Romans think about immigration? One of the things that distinguished the Roman state was their ability to integrate people within the Roman state. And it was an instinct of theirs within the very earliest republic. There was a distinction between those people who had full Roman citizen rights, but then there were a range of other groups within Italy who were granted citizen rights, but of different levels. Some of them all the way up to the point of having voting rights, and it depended on whether you had voting rights or not. But more in these communities were integrated. And the culmination of this takes place later in the Roman Empire, when in fact an edict is issued by the Roman Emperor Caracalla that then makes everybody within the boundary of the Roman Empire a citizen. Okay. In the midst of this, there was, in the 2nd century, when the Roman Empire was really expanding, it seemed like that was a moment when the Romans weren't giving out citizen rights quite as much as maybe they had been, or to the degree previously. This ultimately led to a civil war that raged for a couple years in the year 90. Once it took off, the Romans, and several people, at the end of the 2nd century BCE were saying, people making proposals, we should grant full citizen rights to everybody within Italy. Because there was resentment there, because they had given so much to the Roman Empire and they still didn't have full citizen rights. And the Romans wouldn't do it, okay? They wouldn't do it. And all of a sudden, when the Civil War erupted, they decided, well, maybe this is something we should have done, And to make sure we can keep the support, so that this doesn't get out of hand, they then promptly granted full citizen rights to those communities who didn't rebel. And after they had won, then they extended them to the rest of the people who were kind of holdouts. Now, it's a different time, different demographics, but the idea of violence, extreme discontent and violence from populations who are giving so much, but don't feel to be receiving what they deserve, I think that is a concern. Incidentally, it's ironic, I think, that he would choose Cicero as his voice. Cicero was from the town of Arpinum, which before, which in 180, which was not Rome, and in 188 BCE, it was granted full citizen rights. The only reason why Cicero could give this speech on the floor of the Senate to begin with is because his ancestors, who were immigrants, were given citizen rights within Rome. So I find it interesting that this was the voice selected.
That's absolutely perfect.
Yeah,
Cruz's background.
Right.
Yeah,
you're absolutely right. Again, I think it's I think it's rhetorically a very savvy thing to do.
Be interested to see whether he thought it up or one of his legislative assistants.
That's a question we can't answer today.
But there is something, I like this idea that there's some sort of cachet about bringing in a classical even in this day and age when classics may not be quite so widely known amongst the Senate, these people know of Cicero, and this adds something. If you just sort of dredged up a speech of Paris Hilton, it wouldn't have the same kind of thing.
That would be for a different demographic.
That would be for a different demographic, but it's Cicero that means something. And even if we widely disagree with what he's saying, at least he's using Cicero, that sort of ups it a little bit. And so it's not only a speech that a lot of people happen to know, it's just a name, and that adds something. You just there's a character in a book that I teach frequently, and the main character falls in love with her, and I said, well, of course he falls in love with her because she's beautiful and she knows ancient Greek. And just that's kind of what he's.
Scott, is it in that order or?
Well, to go off that, I studied second year here, took political theory with Professor Scott Johnson, and I think one thing that is kind of speech is trying to convey is a back to basics, back to why government was formed, how it was formed, what is included in the most basic government. The own government, it probably isn't perfect, but it was one of the first forms of government. It's one of the basic forms of government, and it's one of the forms of government that our government, I think, is draws from. And so by using the speech, he kind of says, what's the most basic form of government? What's the most helpful for building government? That idea, not a speech, not necessarily what's in the speech, but that idea is what should be adopted in modern day government.
I think you're right that he's looking to draw parallels between the United States and the Roman Republic. And of course, when the Roman Republic was built to begin with, the founding fathers all knew their Greek and Latin. And when they established it, they were thinking very carefully about past forms of government, and the Roman Republic was a model for them. It was absolutely a model for them. So this is something that antiquity continues to imprint us, and even today.
Cicero was a big influence on Thomas Jefferson. He called Cicero Tully, which is Cicero Tullius, which one of his other names. So sort of he's on first name terms.
Right. Right.
Well, can we, any further?
I just wanted to just throw out a little blessing to all of you. You're promoting literacy. You are.
That's right.
And classics departments are being more and more marginalized today, and I think we're going to unfortunately see more and more of that. But you're the salt of the earth in doing this. I mean it. I really do. Keep doing it. It will pay off, in many ways for you all. And I just would say, if you can share with your friends what you're doing, I would like to see more literacy about the classics at the school and in this nation.
And they're also
rah.
And there are shining examples across the United States as well of thriving departments and programs. Absolutely. And the ones that are the ones that are doing the work that you guys are doing. Making the connection between antiquity and modern period and inviting other people to that discussion. So I think as long as we have students like you doing it, it's going to continue to thrive and grow.
And we just got examples here. We got a historian, a nursing major, a classics major, environmental studies major, a philosopher, and I'm a literature person, and we're all part of the same world. Apparently we're part of the same world as Cruz too.
Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.